Hi, everyone. We're back with another episode of Kòo-sū, a Taiwanese storytelling experience. I'm Grace Huang Lynch, and I'm pleased to introduce today another Grace. We have Grace Loh Prasad, an Oakland-based essayist whose work has been published in Long Reads, Catapult, Jellyfish Review, Cora, and the Misaligned Anthology. I thought maybe a good place to start off would be for you to tell us a little bit about your project that you have called The Translator's Daughter and what the significance of that title is.
Sure. The Translator's Daughter is the name of my memoir, and I've kind of bounced around from calling it a memoir to a memoir and essays to a hybrid memoir. But it's me writing from my life and writing across, my cultures and my languages. So I was born in Taiwan and then lived in the United States when I was younger, and then overseas as a third culture kid. I grew up in Hong Kong. And then from there, I went to college in California. And so, what this memoir is about is that ever since I moved to California for college, I've lived apart from my family. And so, my whole adult life in the United States as an immigrant has really been on my own. And so, for me, there's always been this longing to reconnect with Taiwan. And so, it's not only where my parents ended up living after I was in college, but it's also where all of my ancestors, all of my extended family are, and of course the language that I spoke when I was, when I was younger, and then stopped speaking when I actually started school in the United States. And so, The Translator's Daughter is just really about me trying to bridge those gaps and revisit and reconnect continually with my family and my heritage and the language. And the translator of the title, of course, is my father, who was a Bible translator for 40 plus years. And I think the inherent contradiction, I guess, in that title and in my life is that because my father was a translator and my parents spoke many languages, I actually didn't have to. And so I grew up speaking English. And at the time when I was, like in kindergarten and growing up in New Jersey, during that era, it was very common for Taiwanese parents and other immigrant parents to really focus on assimilation, on, not actually trying to speak the mother tongue to ease the transition into English and into American culture.
So common. I think that that's a very, very prevalent experience. And I am really excited for people to be able to hear a bit of your writing. And you have a piece to share with us from your column that you wrote for Corporeal Cora magazine. And I'd like to have you share that.
This piece is called Unfinished Translation. The border between one year and the next slowly unfurls, the first day of the new year wrapping its arms around the globe, with Tonga celebrating first, and then moving westward across all the continents, reaching American Samoa last. A crooked seam bisects the Pacific Ocean, separating today from tomorrow. Long ago, I accepted the fragmentation of time zones and the strangeness of a phone call in which Tuesday can talk to Wednesday. Living in a different country from my parents, the time difference was just another border we always crossed without a second thought. My dad and I were both born in January, 34 years apart. According to Western astrology, my dad and I are Capricorns. You can count on us, just like you can count on New Year's Day always being on January 1st. But if you look at the lunar calendar, Lunar New Year is more fluid. It skips around between late January and late February. In the lunar calendar, our birthdays are at the end of the year, not the beginning. I'm fascinated by the mismatch of these two systems, the fact that we can occupy two temporal spaces simultaneously, existing in a liminal zone that is transitional and transnational, belonging to both and neither. I asked a friend if there's a name for someone who is born during the overlap of the Western and lunar year. She said that we would be considered the tail of our Chinese zodiac sign. Think of a year as an animal that stretches across 12 months. In the Gregorian calendar, January is the head and December is the tail. In the lunar calendar, February is the head and January is the tail. My dad was born in the year of the pig, but January would be considered the tail of the year of the dog. I was born in the year of the rooster, but January is the tail of the year of the monkey. I wonder if there's a mythological creature that combines these attributes, but the closest I can find is a qilin, an auspicious horned beast with the features of a dragon, ox, and lion. A more fitting metaphor would be the Ouroboros, an ancient symbol of a snake curled into a loop, eating its own tail. The two ends joined in a continuous cycle of beginning and ending, of duality dissolving into unity. Symbols fill the space where language fails. As the daughter of a translator and a child of diaspora, I'm often at a loss for words, stumbling over the edges and gaps where we switch from one system to another, where we lack a perfect translation or direct equivalent. How do I explain that living in two cultures is both abundance and loss at the same time? How do I describe the things I miss from another place and time when I don't have words for them? I wish I could consult my dad on this, but he passed away 5 years ago. I don't know how to write across this divide, how to navigate all that he knows that I'll never know. But I can tell you about who he was. My dad was a middle child in a large family, the third of 6 sons, the fifth of 10 children, of a Presbyterian minister and missionary who traveled for months at a time spreading the gospel to the indigenous tribes of Taiwan. He grew up wearing hand-me-downs and jostling for an extra bite of rice at a crowded dinner table. Once, he told me, my grandpa bought a brick of peanut brittle that he intended to cut into pieces and sell for a profit at the market the next day. The children, unaccustomed to the luxury of sweets but fearful of their dad's wrath, snuck into the kitchen and took turns licking the peanut brittle, thinking he wouldn't notice as the block became sticky and lost its shape. My dad was fluent in 3 languages by the time he went to high school. His mother tongue was Taiwanese, mainly spoken in private with family members at home. Between 1895 and 1945, Taiwan was a colony of Japan, so my dad's second language was Japanese. His education until World War II ended was in Japanese, and he and his siblings called each other by their Japanese nicknames from childhood, well into their old age. His third language was Mandarin, which became the official language after Japan surrendered in World War II, and the Republic of China took control of Taiwan. After Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang Army arrived in 1949, Taiwanese and other local dialects were banned in an effort to increase identification with the mainland, and they remained underground for nearly 4 decades under martial law. It was not until my dad was in college in the late 1950s that he began to seriously study English. His Christian faith and ability to master the 4th and most difficult language distinguished him from his peers and set him on a trajectory that led to graduate school in the United States and a PhD from Princeton Theological Seminary. He would go on to become an expert in Bible translation. My dad mastered 4 languages before I was even born. He navigated far beyond what he could have imagined as the poor son of an itinerant minister in colonial-era Taiwan, traveling the world to supervise translation projects that took him from Canadian tribal reservations to the islands of Micronesia and everywhere in between. I wonder if he knew that the great distances he traveled and the struggles he overcame would one day make it harder for his daughter to find her way back. I once interviewed my dad about his Bible translation work. He said that interpretation was the first step, referring back to and explaining the meaning of the original text, and translation was the second step, explaining into the target language. "What language is the interpretation done in?" I asked him. He said that it would normally be in the target language, but sometimes a third language is needed, such as English or Chinese, when the translator doesn't know the original Greek or Hebrew. Then the interpretation is translated from the third language into the target language. Many of the projects my dad oversaw were translations into indigenous languages in China and Taiwan, and he was often the final editor, checking the drafts against the original Hebrew or Greek, a circular process ending where it began. In 1960, when my dad boarded an airplane for the first time, it took 27 hours to fly from Taipei to New York, with refueling stops in Oakland and Hawaii. Today, I can make that same trip nonstop in half the time. Although the miles are the same no matter which direction I fly, the psychic distance is greater when I travel to Taiwan. I lose a day in transit and feel like I can never catch up. The flight duration is identical, but the experience is asymmetrical. My body sags with an unnamed ache when going towards a place where my dad no longer waits for me, where I am still learning to speak for myself. I tell myself the journey will get easier. If time and words are not fixed in stone, maybe there is a version of my life where I am not too late, a translation that will make me whole. Maybe the language where I live is not the end point, but an interval, a rest stop on the way home.
And in the meantime, can you tell people how they can follow you online or on social media?
Sure, absolutely. So I tweet as Grace LP, and you can find me on Instagram at Grace Prasad and on Facebook at grace.lprasad. So again, look forward to connecting with many more of you. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and hope to be able to share The Translator's Daughter in full with you sometime soon.
All right, looking forward to it. And we will be back to introduce everyone to more Taiwanese American writers throughout the festival. So stay tuned. Zai